Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Halcyon Show, the podcast. I'm your host, Lorne Risley. On this episode, I'm going to open with an apology. I am sicky poo, I'm afraid, as you can probably tell by the terrible state of my voice. However, I have endeavoured to ensure content is produced week on week from here on in. I'm going to make sure that I'm living up to the moniker that I promised. See, I am so incoherent so far in this episode, so let's dispense with the niceties and let's just get into the news and topics and things of that nature. So, there's a couple of things I wanted to talk about on this podcast. The first one is an idea that I had that I'm going to scrap. Basically, a good friend of mine who runs a channel, Defunct Games. Basically, him and I have fairly lengthy post discussions in my videos, just going back and forth on ideas and things of that nature. The chances are I will probably make a video based on these interactions at some point. It's just I haven't really worked out what the gimmick should be, i.e., am I trying to make fun of the debate between the two of us, making fun of me and him in the process? Should I ostracize certain elements and treat it like a very serious discussion, or should I make a parody of it? I don't know. I've just learned that I'd rather not just do a half-baked idea and sort of see how it goes now. I'd rather flesh out an idea and make sure it works, so it's at least half entertaining. So be on the lookout for something along those lines at some stage, a more debate-based format kind of show where I'm going to be retorting to shit. In other news, point I wanted to make further to the last podcast with regards to that particular back and forth with DLC. I appreciate everyone taking the time to listen to it. I just think that I will retort more fully, but I still feel very stringent in my position on DLC, given the practices of most companies these days when it comes to actually, using DLC in the way it should be intended to be used. I think there was a couple of developers that were making the point not too long ago that there are things that are free in games, and the fact that they're using the term free is a little bit disconcerting because they think, oh well, because you're not paying for it, it's free and that's a good thing. And it's like, well, no, I already paid for the game, so yeah, what are you going to do? In other news, let's talk about politics first, just to get some of this stuff out of the way, and then I'll get into my big point of this podcast. So, a couple of news stories. The main one is the ongoing President Donald Trump issues in America, i.e. this interaction he supposedly had with a porn star, which looks more and more like well, let's be honest with it, it's true. One of his lawyers, or one of his previous lawyers, has come out and said that he's bribed them with about £100,000 worth in hush money. To drill down to the point at this stage, I think the fact that the United States of America currently has a president that it's not really deniable that he's corrupt. It's almost like a Berlusconi situation. His charisma and the people believing in his ideals rather than his actions seem to be carrying the day at the moment. And, speaking to, again, Cyril, the guy that runs Defunct Games, his perspective is that it's a very... it's a troublesome time to be a US citizen because you just don't know how these policies are going to affect you. In the UK, it's a little bit different. I think a lot of people take a back seat when it comes to politics because the politics in this country seems to have been not radicalized, that's too strong a word, but it's the debate these days usually boils down to immigration, people coming into the country, working illegally, staying illegally, yada, yada, yada. I think the biggest problems in our country probably don't necessarily stem from overpopulation. They stem from the same problems that the United States of America faces, that India faces, that China faces, is that it's trickle-down economics and it doesn't work. It has never worked. The fact that a middle class was formed 50, 60 years ago after the outset of a war, when governments actually needed their populace to care about the reasons why we were fighting, so they had to incentivize them to care with housing subsidiaries, good pay, pensions and things of that nature. Effectively created a middle class, which is tremendously rare historically. So the fact that this middle class now seems to be shrinking, now that we're further and further away from the conflict that gave the middle class, that afforded them the opportunity to make the most out of a truly horrific situation with the outset of 2 world wars. It's they're paying the price now, because obviously we're moving further and further away from the ideals that those wars were based on, which is everyone is equal, everyone's entitled to a fair shake. Oh God, I sound terrible. I can't imagine how bad this podcast sounds, so if anyone is listening at this point, I profusely apologize. Anyway, getting back to the point. As far as the United States of America is concerned, with their leader, so long as he doesn't seek to provoke other countries into some kind of conflict, then, to be perfectly frank with you, you've just got to ride it out for the next 4 years. Or change your voting structure, because if the person with the most votes can go on to lose, I think everyone agrees that that's a pretty stupid system to have. But again, that's just my humble opinion. I'm probably going to be changing my ideals when it comes to voting at some stage, because I think that the time for bipartisan agreements is passing, and people need to look at their political systems and engage with them in a different way. And I've got to think about how I want to approach it, in terms of how I want to change from just disengaging entirely, which is what I preached in a couple of previous episodes of the weekly show, i.e. I don't vote because I don't have a candidate that I like, or a set of ideals that I like, because there's no single party that represents the interests of the country, broadly speaking, because we're all in different demographics, and that's fair enough, I guess, to an extent. But I also think it speaks to how fractured we are as a society when we have so many different interest groups, so many different people screaming at the top of their lungs to be heard, that no one is. If we could all come together and agree on a couple of core ideals that we all, sort of agree upon, then I think we'd all be better for it, to be perfectly honest. But again, that's a nigh impossibility, because with democracy, everyone gets their fair say, which is fine, but with democracy doesn't come the education necessarily to utilise it in the way that it was always intended, i.e. people have the vote, but should they have the vote? I mean, I saw a news story the other day, for instance. This is going off on a bit of a tangent, but I saw a news story where they were talking about proposing maybe having 16-year-olds vote. I can't think of anything dumber than making people that still haven't fully developed as people give them the ability to vote. To be perfectly honest, if you were asking me, I would give fewer people the vote overall. I would raise the voting age to something like 24 or something along those lines. Let people have the opportunity to get into the world, learn what it's really like, understand the ins and outs of how the economy works for you, i.e. what are you worth, what money do you see, what money goes out, this sort of business, and then you can have a point of view and an opinion worth listening to. Anyway, that kind of covers the politics side of things. Like I said, I'll go into more depth with regards to the Trump issue at some stage, I'm sure, because I'm sure that'll going to get some of that clickbait at some point. Oh, she's wearing a... sorry, I'm just checking out the story on BBC. I thought it was a Dolphins poster she was standing in front of. No, it's just a random sapphire poster. I don't know. Honestly, Donald Trump is the most preposterous individual you've ever seen. But hey, the US voted him in, so they must have seen something I don't. Anyway, moving on to a couple of other topics, sports-wise. Alexandre Lacazette is out for a few weeks now, which is a bit of a shame, but I think from the perspective of a fan that saw him benched, didn't really utilise his chances against Spurs, which is a tremendously frustrating game for Arsenal fans. You know, it's not the worst thing in the world that we've got now, Aubameyang, because he can lead the line quite easily. It's just dependent on whether or not Danny Welbeck can make the grade as coverage, basically, because I think he's the most natural centre-forward choice, even though he's often deployed out on the wings. But I think he's a tremendous finisher, and so long as we can get him the service, he would deputise quite nicely, which is great. Aside from that, sports-wise, I haven't really got a tremendous amount. Obviously, Ryan Mason had to retire the other day, which is a tremendously sad news story. Even though he's a Spur, we put that to one side for a second, because when, football is tribal, and we like to say F you and all the rest of it, but when it's someone's livelihood, especially someone so young, it's 26 years old, it's devastating, the fact that he's got to retire. I think it was a classy move by Spurs, basically saying that, if he wants to do his coaching, or if he wants a job, he'll always have one there. So, I've got to give credit to Spurs for that, but it's still just, it's a tremendous thing. I think that the thing, though, is this will lead to calls to change the rules of the game to make it slightly less combative in the air, which is ironically enough, one of the last physical elements of football. Back when I played, it was certainly very, very physical back in the day. Just going up for a header was a terrifying experience, but it helped build your mettle, and then that meant you went on to slide tackles, jousting for the ball, making runs knowing that a defender's going to go across you and try to take the ball before he takes you out. So long as he makes contact first, it's not technically a foul. But football these days seems to be going more and more down the line of sanitising it, which, fair enough. It's why I think I'm slowly but surely gravitating away from American football and moving more towards boxing and MMA, because it's still, broadly speaking, people know what they're signing up for when they get in, and then they don't complain about it after the fact. If you sign up to be a footballer, and then after the fact you start complaining about the fact that you've got to go up for headers and things like that, which is something that's probably going to happen more and more as time goes on, and the players become more and more delicate, then I've got no time for you, to be perfectly honest. It's why the Spanish style of football, where they draw fouls and things of that, doesn't interest me in the slightest. The English game is probably the last bastion of physical football that there is, especially in the Championship. But it's, who knows, maybe I should be more cognizant of the health of these people, but by the same token, they're compensated handsomely for it. So listen, if I had the choice between working my job for the next 40 years to try and reach retirement age with enough in the pot to see me through and provide for my family in the meantime, or play for 10 years, potentially run the risk of getting some kind of injury or whatever, but it means I can afford to live in the lap of luxury for the rest of my life, so long as I haven't pissed it all away on cars and cocaine, hey, I know which choice I'm picking. Might be the only one, but there you go. So having touched on sport, like I say, there isn't a tremendous amount otherwise going with regards to sport at the moment. It's a slow week. Football isn't actually on until the weekend now. Let's talk about the main reason why I wanted to talk in this podcast, despite the fact that I sound like I'm doing a really crap Al Pacino impression. Twitter. Let's have a conversation about Twitter, shall we? So, a few months back now, actually, it feels like yesterday, but a few months back, the Adam Blompier situation blew up. People went to Twitter, I went to Twitter, I got into some arguments, and let's say, safe to say, I don't think anyone walked away any wiser or any better from the situation. I think it was a lose-lose situation for everybody. Me in particular, I went on a half an hour, 45-minute rant with a couple of people I'd interacted with at the time because they'd misconstrued what I was trying to say. And the long and the short is, I got called a sexist by a few people. I was trying to say, right, well, can you explain why you're saying that? And they just retorted with, no, you're a sexist, so I'm not going to give you the time of day. And it's like, right, well, this is not very productive and you're missing what I'm saying to you. So it led me to think about Twitter and where we've arrived at this point in time, with the President of the United States of America utilising it as his main form of communication with people of the world when he's talking about slating foreign countries, slating people in his administration, sportsmen, African Americans who are protesting the national anthem and things of that nature. And you've got other people using it as a platform to simply express themselves and then follow it up with a almost hilarious apology of everything that they've just said, as a vain attempt to try and apologise to those who are easily offended. I think what you need to bring it back to is what Twitter was originally designed for, which is Twitter was just a means of funny little ideas, just a little funny thought here and there, a joke, a freaking just a quirk, something along those lines. That's why it was 140 characters. It was never designed to help people make a wider point about serious issues. And I don't think it was certainly designed to be the medium with which we use to debate things. Now, I've arrived at this because I for a long time used Twitter as a means to try and express myself in a meaningful way. I thought that having time to eloquate your thoughts, put them down, edit them before you start, putting it into the stratosphere was a good idea. I thought it was interesting. I thought it was a great way for me to communicate, especially when it's there in writing, it's hard to misconstrue. But as it's evolved, I've gone less away from making funny little stupid things on Twitter and making jokes and using it to make wider points. And I realise how hypocritical that is. I mean, I just did it today. It was after these tweets that I was just sitting there thinking about how I was tweeting and the fact that someone could so easily take some of these tweets out of context. Someone so easily could just take one. And basically the tweets were about transgender, the transgender argument. I.e., what should the ethics be in the situation? Should they be allowed to compete in representative sports? So to take this as the example, it's becoming more and more prevalent that transgender men who have transferred from being a man to a woman are trying to compete in sports. Now, for whatever reason, I'm not too sure what the ins and outs are when it comes to why they're not allowed to compete in their original sport anymore, but they are allowed to compete in the women's sport. I think it's probably to do with obviously them embracing their identity, and I get that, and that's fine to a degree. However, the problem I have with it is when you talk about the physicality of an individual versus the physicality of another individual in the same bracket, so to speak. Let me put it to you this way. It's the reason why you have age tiers in football, in rugby, and in boxing and the Olympics. It's the reason why you have weight classes, and it's the reason why you have male sports and female sports. There are levels to this, and there are tiers to this. It's not me saying that transgender people shouldn't be free to pursue the sporting ideals that they had while they were still a man or while they were still a woman, but you have to look at the practicality of the situation. So if you're talking about a man transitioning into being a woman and the man wants to pick up his sport, and let's say it's boxing, I just don't think it's fair or reasonable to assume that there's no fallout from that. You have to think of a cleverer or smarter way to be able to integrate these people into sport, because you should. Everyone should be free to pursue their sporting interests, just like they should be if they're gay or straight, if they're black, white, if they have religious beliefs or whatever the case may be. They should be free to pursue whatever makes them happy, but not at the expense of other people. This is the thing. This is this power of the individual thing that seems to be overshadowing feelings over facts. And the fact is, I have a little girl. If one day she told me, okay, I want to take up rugby. Now, to be perfectly honest, and this is probably going to sound misogynistic, I wouldn't want that. It's not a sport that I think is particularly safe, and I'd want my girl doing something where she can't get hurt. Now, if it makes her happy, you can't stop it. You've got to support. It doesn't matter if it's your kid, brother, sister, mum, dad, friend, neighbour, whatever. If they want to do something, you've got to support it. Now, if she does play rugby and I see in the same age bracket another young girl who used to be a boy competing, I've got a serious problem with this, because unfortunately I don't draw the line. I do draw the line and say, what is the difference there between just letting a boy in the midst of this scrum? It's not fair, it's not reasonable, you wouldn't let it happen. I'm not getting into the transgender argument itself, because there's layers to that argument. I think there's credence to people saying that if people want to pursue their happiness, that's fine. However, when it comes to the transgender movement, I fear we're maybe losing the thread back to why it was such an odd thing in the first place. I get that people want to be inclusive of everybody these days, but at some point you have to draw the line for me, and I'll get into that in another time when I have more time to flesh out this point. But for the time being, the sporting element, I just think from the practical side of boys, just generally speaking, are bigger than girls and stronger than girls and faster than girls. And that's not a sexist point to make. You can look at any world record and see the discrepancy between the two sexes at their peak physical conditioning, and you'll see that there's that point. Now, the reason why I'm bringing this particular issue is because it's a hot topic. This issue, if not eloquated properly, could get me into some serious trouble, because some people will take it as me being, I don't know what the term is, transphobic, I think, against transgender people. And nothing could be further from the truth. If you want to pursue that, then broadly speaking, my sentiments are this: so long as your beliefs, so long as your pursuit of happiness doesn't interfere with my own, and vice versa, then you can do whatever the hell you want. But that point is difficult to articulate in 140 characters, in 280 characters, or whatever it is. And it's also difficult when you're trying to make the point in sentences that you're going to have to end on a point, because most people will be so quick to snap at that line and disassemble it and read their own thing into it, that it's difficult to have a conversation. Twitter is not designed to have conversations. Twitter is designed for quick quirks. It's designed for put downs. It's designed wholly for the culture of self-gratification. That's all it is. The best example of someone that I see that uses Twitter these days, and I'm sorry to have to include him in this because he's probably not going to appreciate it, if he ever listens to the show, I profusely apologise. But nevertheless, a gentleman by the name of Shuffle T, who's a freestyle rapper, whatever, I don't know what the term is, I'm too white to know, I'm not part of the group. Anyway, point being, his tweets are usually comedic in nature. They're usually a joke, some kind of pun, usually well summarised, usually not that long, and they're just good for a quick little chuckle. That's all they are. They're not meant to reach out to his fans. They're not meant to make a broader point about sexism or cancer or whatever the fuck the topic happens to be on that occasion. They're not meant there to promote him to a degree. They're there simply as is his outlet for a joke. He's not charging you for following him. He's not charging you per joke. It's just, I had a quirky little thought. I think I'll put it out there and see if anyone likes it. And that's that. That's what I admire. And if I was smarter and cleverer, smarter and funnier and clever, I'd probably use Twitter for the same thing. But my observations are usually very, very benign and not very funny at all, which is why I don't do comedy very well. I have to stick to my serious lane, and I have to stick to debating people on facts and points, assuming that they're intelligent enough and receptive enough to have the conversation, which is again why Twitter is dangerous for someone like me, because I'm a provocateur, or whatever the fuck the word is. But anyway, point is, I like being the contrarian. I like stirring the pot a little bit, provoking a response. I like seeing the other side of an argument. I like taking the other side of an argument so long as it doesn't compromise my own values in order to further a narrative. So the Blompier incident was a classic case in point where I didn't look at his actions necessarily and justify them and say, well, it's not that bad and yada, yada, yada. I looked at more the absurdity of Twitter, the fact that people thought they could beat sexism by going to Twitter and ranting at people. Specifically one individual who, to be perfectly honest, and this is getting real now, didn't do a tremendous amount wrong legally speaking, but morally, yes, I have a real problem with cheating on people. Never been cheated on, I don't think, and I've certainly never cheated on anyone myself, but it's one of those things where, just from the perspective of wanting to live in a world where I'd feel secure in my relationship and she in my relationship with her, knowing that she doesn't have to worry about me looking at other girls or interacting with them or seeking that kind of gratification, is the kind of world I want to live in. That's not the point, though. The point was the absurdity that people felt that by banding together and forming what effectively is a mob with regards to a personal situation that had nothing to do with a lot of these people, and I mean nothing to do with a lot of these people, they want to make it part of what's there. They feel, right, well, this happened to a woman. I'm a woman, that makes it my business. And you go, okay, well, can we look at the individual circumstances before we blow up? We make this guy the not the martyr, that's the wrong word, but we tie him to the stake and we set him on fire. And more to the point, you're doing it on Twitter. It's a very closed environment. It's an echo chamber. It isn't the place where argument and debate can be done, because unless you're just asking a question, which is what I tend to do, I tend to ask a lot of questions because it helps corner people's arguments. Unless you're asking questions, it's not easy to retort in a timely manner in one tweet. It's just not really possible. So my attempts to try and corner their idea by saying, look, I understand you're angry by the story, and I understand you feel a sense of ownership for the women that were involved in the story versus him. And I'm not defending what he did in any way. And if I did initially, I would like to say I'm probably wrong on that. Without knowing the ins and outs of the story itself and seeing how much he's capitulated, I think it's a fairly safe assumption to say that if I ever defended him at one point in any of my tweets, I'd have to go back and look at them because I don't remember. Not really relevant right now, but anyway, I would be wrong about that. But the point, broadly speaking, that I was trying to make with, I think two girls in particular and one guy, I forget the names, I'd have to, again, look back through Twitter and it's not relevant, to say, look, do you understand that you ganging up on this one person without knowing the ins and outs of the situation, without really understanding what you're doing, you're banding together and bullying him off of the platform. You're not doing anything positive. You're not quelling sexism. You're not quelling misogyny. You're not enhancing women anywhere. You're bullies. You're bullying this person. I'm not saying that they did nothing wrong, but that's irrelevant. It's the same reason why you have to, in any situation, you have to try and take the moral high ground. You have to try and reinforce the society that you want, rather than the society that you live in and ignore for the sake of your own goals and needs. It's the reason why I don't try to use this platform as a platform for rage. I don't like using my Facebook or my YouTube channel for rage-induced, I'm really pissed off about this, and I really want to get angry at this. And you go, well, there's ways that you can deal with that. There's ways that you can put those points across without needing to just spit forth, a tirade of venom at people. There's cleverer ways. And the same with Twitter and the people's need to affect change using Twitter. I actually made this point when debating these people. I get that it's an easy medium to use because you can reach anyone in the world with this medium. People can reach out, they can put their ideas and thoughts out. And that's good to a degree, but like voting, and this is where it comes full circle now. I did have this in my head, so don't worry. This long rambling thing does have a point, don't worry. Just like voting, I don't think everybody should be entitled to a social media account until they've proven they know how to use it properly. I don't think people should be entitled to vote unless they understand the gravity of what that entitlement actually means. I don't think I should vote because I don't have the faintest idea what I'd be voting for. So it's not me saying, well, I know what I'm talking about, so I deserve the vote, but there's other people that don't. No, I understand perfectly that I don't understand enough about the parties, the political process, the policies, how these effects will go down, what the history of the voting system is, and the history of these parties is to be able to make a formed decision. That discounts me from that argument, and it discounts me from being able to vote, in my opinion. For social media, I think I've discounted myself from that as well, ironically enough. I shouldn't be allowed Twitter. In fact, I'm not even sure I should be allowed YouTube unless I'm trying to be entertaining rather than these podcasts where I try to be a little bit informative and I like to try and spark a debate if I can. I'm not trying to be entertaining in these videos because, let's be honest, I'm the least entertaining person on the planet. There are funerals for kittens that are more entertaining than me. I can already hear some people in the background saying, yeah, I've seen some pretty funny funerals for kittens. You're sick people. You're sick. You need help. Sicker than me, and I've got the cold. See, that was a joke, and a terrible one at that. So I'm going to stay in my lane when it comes to this because I know I'm right. The trouble with debating me is, and I'm going to send this warning out to anybody who ever does get into a debate with me on Twitter or on YouTube, if I debate you on something rather than just saying, listen, I don't know anything about this, so I'm not going to get involved. If I ever choose to debate you, it's because I know I'm right. It's because I've looked into this shit. It's because I've seen both perspectives, and I've said, this is how I feel. This is how this evidence puts forth. It's the reason why I signed off my tweets earlier on with a statement basically saying, look, this is my trail of thought. This is why I think what I think. This is what I think we should do And if anyone wants to debate me on it, I want to hear arguments to the contrary. I want to hear people put forward something to me that makes sense. I want to see the evidence that contradicts my standpoint so I can evaluate it and reassess my position, because I think everybody as a whole should be willing to reassess their position on things. Everybody should be willing to admit they're wrong, should be willing to assimilate new information and assimilate a different point of view to your own, because there's nothing that says you can't change your perspective on shit. Every day is an opportunity to change your perspective on shit. It's just whether or not you're a man enough to be able to do it. Now, coming back to the point, and to sum up this entire podcast and the reason why I wanted to make it, because of one little teeny tiny thought I had while I was posting about the transgender thing. I don't think Twitter should be used to make wider points. I think we should get back to using Twitter for what it was originally intended for, which is just making each other giggle, having random thoughts. And hey, if you want to use it as a promotional tool, like I do with this show, then I think that's fine too, because I think ultimately, it's easy to share stuff. It's just 1 click and 2 clicks if you want to retweet it and like it. I still don't really understand the difference between the two. But anyway, if you want to use it for those reasons, I completely understand and get it. In fact, I would implore people that don't to do it. It's an interesting experience. Interacting with other people as well, so long as you've got an intelligent question, then again, that's fine. But for trolling, for raging, and again, unless it's unless you're parodying yourself and you're being sarcastic and you're not actually that pissed off, you're just making a joke, fair enough. But anyway, raging, for attacking people, for starting movements, I'm sorry, you've got the wrong idea with it. It's just not the right way, because how is anyone ever meant to breach your perspective on things when you're using an echo chamber? And that makes you just as much as part of the problem as anyone else, because if you're talking about, equal rights for women, civil rights, sexual rights, so I don't know how you'd phrase that, equal rights for people of different sexual orientations, religious rights, and things of that nature. These are all incredibly complex conversations that have nuance and subtlety that require a degree of back and forth, and sometimes you need to listen rather than just stress your own point, because you don't have all the answers. No one does. Even in debates where I know I'm right, usually it's because I know the end point is still right, but I might want to reevaluate my position depending on new information. With the transgender argument, to bring it back again, if someone wants to propose something along the lines of, well, if a man's transitioning between a man and a woman, and when he becomes a woman, he will only, say to the UFC, he will only compete in a weight class that women compete in, broadly speaking, and women are happy to do that, and it's open, then, to be honest, again, I'd probably not see the issue there, so long as women understand that it's effectively a man they're fighting, but that the weight isn't an issue, and that skill-wise there's no issue. That's something that might make me change my mind. But again, I've not seen any examples of this that would make me change my mind, hence my position that I take. So what I'm encouraging people to do is just look at social media for what it is. It's an opportunity to connect with people personally. It shouldn't really be used to further political points, social points. It's good for having a laugh. But if you want to get involved in that sort of thing, I think you need to be more proactive. I think you need to get out there. I think you need to debate people. I think you need to make it part of your conversation when you're around people. You need to confront ideas, but in a respectful manner, rather than just shooting every idea down that doesn't match your own. And Twitter, for all its positives, has one big flaw in that it's everyone's outlet these days for making these massive points, these tremendously complex situations and arguments reduced down to likes and retweets, and I think that's sad. So in my long rambling way, I hope I've made some kind of sense today, considering that I sound like I've been hit by a goddamn bus. So I apologise profusely for the quality of this podcast in terms of my sound, but I hope that hasn't necessarily affected the point that I've tried to make, especially in the latter part of the podcast. So if anyone has made it this far, you're an absolute star. I'd give you a hug, but I'd infect you with something, so I won't. So thank you very much for listening. Please like, share, subscribe. Take a look at some of the other content I produced recently. It really helps if you do like it, if you do share it, even if it's just to one of your friends, or if you share it on your Facebook or on your Twitter or whatever. It really helps the show because it gets more eyes on the product. Also, check out some of the other content creators in the description below. If anyone's actually made it to the end of this podcast, so GFY Productions, Defunct Games, 5-minute discussions, a lovely young lady who makes some really excellent videos. I don't give her enough props. She's absolutely fantastic. You've got Crow, who makes these playthroughs. You've got all sorts. Let me get this up. Let me do this properly here. So GFY, Crow. Who else you've got? You've got Battle Geek Plus. I follow his channel, although I don't think he needs any support from me. Kane, happy little YouTuber, made a 4-second video recently. Just go watch that. It's 4 seconds. Edits him singing. He's a talented young lad. He deserves your support. TT Burger 88, the Bash Brothers. The Bash Brothers make movie reviews and they're excellent, so I really appreciate if you go and check them out. Croatian dudes and they're hilarious, make great points. Oh god, I always mispronounce this. Melgacius, annoying accent reviews. Go check him out. He does gameplay. He's a funny dude as well. And any other content creators I put in the description below. That's enough love for today. I think you've had enough love instead of a cozy hug from Papa Lorne here. So thank you very much for listening to this podcast. Please like, share, and subscribe, as I've said before. Check out some of the other content. Check out the creators. Take care of yourselves. Try not to get this cold that I've got, because otherwise you're going to be wrapped up in bed like I am. I'm literally going to put this recording down, upload it, and then head to bed. So yeah, I'll wake up tomorrow morning to some rage on Twitter. Also, one last thing before I leave. Defunct Games. I'm thinking about, like I said, putting a debate sort of style video at some point. If anyone has any ideas for what they'd like me to see in relation to the things we discuss in my comment sections, i.e. making a parody of it, then send me the ideas, because I'd be totally open to what people think would be funny or think would be interesting for me to produce. So thanks very much for your suggestions in advance. If you do, please take care of yourselves. This has been the Halcyon Podcast. I've been your very, very sick host, Lorne Risley, and I'll see you guys on the next episode.